On a ranch where silence is power, one secret can destroy everything. The road to Blackwood Ranch did not feel like a road. It felt like a line drawn away from everything Evelyn had ever known. The asphalt ended miles ago, replaced by cracked dirt that stretched endlessly between dry grass and skeletal trees. The sky hung low, heavy with the dull gray of late autumn in Montana, and no signal. No passing cars, no voices, just the wind. But even in this void, Evelyn wasn't entirely cut off. Tucked beneath her seat was a satellite phone, an expensive, clunky necessity she had insisted on before taking the job. It was her only tether to the world she'd left behind, a way to reach the legal contacts she'd spent years cultivating. The ink was faded, sent by mail weeks ago, but it was the only thing guiding her through the unmarked intersections where the asphalt had surrendered to the dust. She wasn't just a teacher fleeing a broken marriage. She was a woman who had spent 6 years as a paralegal for one of the most aggressive land use firms in Chicago. She knew how to read a deed better than a textbook, and she knew that power in places like this didn't rest in buildings, but in the paper trails hidden behind them. For a second, she thought about turning back, not because she could, but because part of her still believed she should. But there was nothing behind her anymore, nothing worth returning to. The ranch appeared suddenly, as if it had been hiding in the land rather than standing on it. A cluster of worn buildings, faded wood, dark roofs pressed low against the horizon. A few horses moved slowly near a fence, their shapes almost blending into the muted colors of the earth. Everything about the place felt still, not peaceful, controlled. She parked near the main house, the engine's dying rattle leaving a hollow silence in its wake. As she stepped out, the cold hit immediately, sharp, dry, and smelling of old hay and wood smoke, cutting through her coat before she could even reach for her bag. Da-da-he. Stavitv Pirshuchistinu Psla Richinga controlled. Her boots sank slightly into the dirt as she looked around, taking in the silence. No welcome, no movement, just the distant creak of something wooden shifting in the wind. You're late. The voice came from behind her. Evelyn turned. He stood a few steps away, as if he had been there long enough to watch her without being noticed. Tall, broad shoulders, worn jacket, dust on his boots like he belonged to the ground itself. His face was unreadable, but his eyes weren't. They were sharp and distant. I'm Evelyn, she said, steady despite the tension tightening in her chest. I know. No introduction. No greeting. He looked at the truck, then back at her, as if assessing whether she was a problem or just another temporary inconvenience. You're the teacher, he added. Yes. A pause. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of dry earth and animals. He nodded once. Kyle. That was all. No handshake. No attempt at politeness. Just a name, given like a fact that didn't need explanation. Evelyn forced herself not to react. She had expected resistance. What she hadn't expected was how quickly the place, and the people in it, would make her feel like she didn't belong. Someone was supposed to meet me, she said. I did. That's it. That's enough. The answer was flat, not rude, just final. Evelyn exhaled slowly, controlling the frustration rising inside her. She had not come all this way to argue in the first minute. She looked past him, toward the buildings. Where do I stay? Kyle turned without answering and started walking, expecting her to follow. She hesitated only for a second before grabbing her bag and moving after him. The main house was larger than it looked from the outside, but just as cold. The interior smelled faintly of wood smoke and something older, something that had settled into the walls over years of silence. The floors creaked under their steps. This way, Kyle said, opening a door at the end of a narrow hallway. The room was small. A bed, a table, a window facing the empty stretch of land. No decorations, no warmth. You'll have what you need, he said. Evelyn set her bag down, glancing around. I was told there were children. There are. I'm supposed to teach them. You are. She turned to face him fully. Where? He leaned slightly against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her in a way that made her feel like he was measuring something she couldn't see. Old storage building. Been empty a while. You can use it. It's not ready. No. And no one thought to prepare it? No. The simplicity of his answers made it worse. Evelyn felt a sharp edge of anger cut through her exhaustion. So I'm supposed to fix it myself? Kyle didn't move. You wanted to be here. The words landed harder than they should have. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then looked away first. "I'll need tools," she said quietly. "You'll get them." Another pause. He straightened and stepped back from the door. "You'll start tomorrow." "Tomorrow." He looked at her again, expression unchanged. "If you're staying." Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. Not doubt. Not exactly. But the weight of the choice she had already made. She lifted her chin slightly. "I am." Kyle studied her for a second longer, as if expecting hesitation. When it didn't come, he nodded once. "Then tomorrow." He left without another word. The sound of his boots faded down the hallway until the house swallowed it completely. Evelyn stood alone in the small room, the silence pressing in from every side. She walked to the window and looked out. The land stretched endlessly, empty and unforgiving. No city lights, no noise, no distractions, just distance. For the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to feel it. The isolation, not as an idea, but as something real, something that would not let her hide from anything. Not from the past, not from herself. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar for a moment. Less certain, more exposed, but still standing. She turned away from the window and began unpacking slowly, placing each item with deliberate care as if order could create stability in a place that had none. Outside, the wind grew stronger, moving through the ranch like a warning or a test. Evelyn did not know yet which one it was. Morning came without softness. The light was pale and cold, slipping through the thin curtains as if it had no intention of warming anything it touched. Evelyn woke before the ranch did, or at least before it made any sound. For a moment, she didn't move, listening. No traffic, no distant hum of a city, only the faint whistle of wind pressing against the walls. She sat up slowly, grounding herself in the unfamiliar room. The events of yesterday settled back into place with quiet certainty. She was here. There was no delay, no adjustment period. The work would start now. Outside, the air bit harder than it had the day before. Frost clung to the edges of the wooden fence and traced thin lines along the ground. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter and stepped off the porch, scanning the yard. Movement came in fragments. A man crossing between buildings. A horse shifting near the stable. No one paid attention to her. "Over here." Kyle's voice carried without effort. She turned. He stood near a smaller structure behind the main house, already holding a set of tools. No greeting. No wasted time. Evelyn walked toward him, her steps steady despite the uneven ground. "That's the building." He nodded once. Up close, the structure looked worse than she expected. The wood was weathered, the windows clouded with dust, one of them cracked. The door hung slightly off alignment. It wasn't abandoned, but it had been forgotten. "This was supposed to be a school?" she asked. "It was storage," Kyle said. "Now it's whatever you make it." While clearing the back corner, Evelyn's foot hit a hollow section of the floor, but it wasn't the rot she expected. She knelt, tracing the seam. It was a deliberate cache. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from the damp, was a stack of old ledger entries and tax receipts. They weren't just drawings. They were the original carbon copies of payments made by a man named Miller. Payments that had never been recorded in the public county books she had checked before arriving. Evelyn studied the door for a second, then reached for the handle. It resisted before giving in with a dry creak. Inside, the air was stale. Dust covered nearly every surface. Old crates lined the walls, some broken, some stacked unevenly. The floor was uneven in places, the boards worn but not entirely ruined. Light forced its way through the dirty windows, cutting thin lines across the space. Evelyn stepped further in, taking it in without speaking. The silence behind her told her Kyle hadn't moved. "It needs clearing," she said finally. "Cleaning. Repairs. Heat. Yes." She turned slightly. "And I'm doing that alone?" "No." A short pause. "I'll help," he added. The words were simple, but something in his tone made it clear. This wasn't voluntary. Evelyn nodded once. "Then we start now." She set her bag near the wall and pushed up her sleeves. No hesitation. No complaints. She grabbed the nearest crate and dragged it across the floor. It scraped loudly, breaking the stillness of the space. Kyle stepped in after her, closing the door behind him. The sound sealed them inside. They worked without conversation at first. He moved efficiently, lifting heavier pieces, stacking what could be reused. She focused on clearing space, brushing dust away, opening what windows she could force open. The air shifted slowly, replacing stale stillness with cold movement. At one point, a board near the center gave under her weight with a dull crack. She stepped back quickly. "Careful," Kyle said, already moving toward it. "I noticed," she replied, catching her balance. He crouched, pressing the weakened section with his hand. "It'll need replacing. Then we replace it." Kyle glanced up at her briefly. No argument. No hesitation. Just a statement accepted as fact. He stood and reached for a set of tools leaning against the wall. "We'll reinforce it for now." Evelyn watched him work for a moment. His movements were precise, practiced. No wasted motion. He didn't explain what he was doing, and she didn't ask. Instead, she moved to the other side of the room, continuing to clear the space. Time passed in measured effort. The room slowly began to change. The crates disappeared. The floor opened up. Light reached further inside. It wasn't finished, not even close, but it was no longer unusable. Evelyn wiped her hands against her jeans, stepping back to look at what they had done. "It's a start." Kyle nodded, adjusting a loose board into place. She moved toward the window, pushing it open a little wider. The cold air rushed in, sharp but clean. For the first time since she arrived, the space felt like it could belong to something new. "You've done this before," she said without turning. Kyle didn't answer immediately. "Fixing things," she clarified. A pause. "Yes." That was all. Evelyn glanced back at him. "Do you always say this little?" He straightened slowly, meeting her gaze. "Only when there's nothing to add." There was no hostility in the answer, just a boundary. Evelyn held his eyes for a second longer than necessary, then looked away, a faint trace of something unreadable crossing her expression. Not frustration, not amusement, something in between. "Fair enough," she said. Another silence settled between them, but it felt different now. Not empty, just unspoken. Outside, a horse moved past the window, its shadow stretching briefly across the floor before disappearing. Evelyn picked up a smaller crate and carried it toward the door. "We'll need desks, books, supplies. You'll get what's available." "That's not the same thing." "No." She stopped at the doorway, turning back slightly. "Then we make it enough." Kyle watched her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not visible enough to name, but present. "Maybe," he said. Evelyn stepped outside, setting the crate down near the wall. The cold air hit her again, but this time it didn't feel as sharp. She looked out across the land, then back at the building behind her. It wasn't ready. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time since she arrived, she wasn't standing still anymore. The first sign of him was not his voice. It was the way the ranch shifted. Conversations stopped before they started. Movement slowed, then corrected. Even the air seemed to tighten, as if the land itself recognized authority before it was spoken. Evelyn noticed it before she saw him. She was inside the storage building, wiping dust from the last intact window, when the sound of boots approached, not rushed, not heavy, but deliberate. Measured. Kyle stopped working. Not fully, not obviously, but enough. Evelyn turned. A man stood in the doorway. He did not need to announce himself. The space adjusted around him without effort. Taller than she expected, older than Kyle by decades, but not weakened by it. His posture was straight, controlled. His coat was darker than the rest of the ranch, cleaner too. Not untouched, but maintained. His eyes moved first. Not to Kyle, but to her. "So," he said calmly, stepping inside. "This is the teacher." Evelyn straightened, brushing her hands clean out of habit more than necessity. "Evelyn." He didn't offer his name. He didn't need to. "I know who you are," he replied. His voice carried no raised tone, no aggression, just certainty. "The question is whether you know where you are." He glanced at the sat phone clipped to her belt with a faint, chilling smile. "That phone works on a frequency I lease from the Valley Tower, Evelyn. I don't just own the dirt you're standing on. I own the signal you're trying to send. Remember that before you think about calling for help that won't come." A pause settled between them. Evelyn met his gaze. "I do." Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Not approval, not disagreement. Recognition. "Do you?" he said. He stepped further into the room, his eyes moving slowly across the space. The cleared floor, the open windows, the stacked materials. Every detail registered. Nothing escaped notice. "This wasn't part of the agreement," he added. Evelyn followed his gaze. The building was unusable. That wasn't your concern. It is if I'm expected to teach here. Silence. Not empty, evaluating. Behind her, she felt Kyle remain still. Not stepping in. Not interrupting. Watching. The man turned his attention to him. You were told to assist. I am, Kyle said. No. The man replied evenly. You were told to make it functional. Not to rebuild it. Kyle didn't answer. Evelyn stepped forward slightly, closing the distance by just enough to shift the focus back. If the children are going to learn here, it needs more than functional. The man looked at her again, this time longer, measuring, not her words, but her willingness to say them. And what exactly do you think they need? He asked. Structure, consistency, space that doesn't fall apart under them, Evelyn said. Her voice stayed level, and the understanding that they're not here just to exist. They're here to learn. Another pause. The man's gaze didn't soften, but it changed direction. From resistance to assessment. You're not from here, he said. No. And yet you believe you understand what's needed. I understand what learning requires. He took a step closer. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just enough to test distance. This is a working ranch, he said. Not a school. Then why bring me here? Evelyn replied without hesitation. The question landed cleanly. For the first time, the silence stretched longer than he intended. Behind her, something shifted, subtle, but present. Kyle's attention sharpened. The man exhaled slowly, then turned slightly, breaking the direct line between them. Simon Blackwood, he said at last. Not an introduction. A statement. Evelyn didn't repeat it. She didn't need to. I expect you to do your job, Simon continued. Nothing more. And I expect to be able to do it properly, Evelyn answered. Their eyes met again. This time, the tension held. Neither moved to break it. Simon's expression remained controlled, but there was something beneath it now, not anger. Not yet. Something closer to resistance meeting resistance. He felt the shift in the room, the way Evelyn didn't flinch. It was a crack in the foundation he had spent decades sealing. Simon turned toward the door, then paused. His attention shifted again, to Kyle, who was standing a fraction too close to the teacher, his posture no longer that of a subordinate. A word, he said. Kyle followed him outside without protest. The door remained open. Evelyn didn't move toward it, but she listened. Not to words. To tone. Low. Controlled. Directed. She stepped closer, just enough to see them without being seen directly. Simon stood facing Kyle, close enough that distance wasn't needed. You're forgetting your place, Simon said quietly. I'm doing what was asked. You're doing more. A pause. That's not your decision to make. Kyle didn't answer. Simon leaned in slightly, not aggressive, but precise. Your father made that mistake once. The words cut cleaner than any raised voice. Kyle's jaw tightened. Not visibly enough for most, but enough. You don't get to choose which rules apply to you, Simon continued. Not here. Another silence. Evelyn felt something shift, not in the conversation, but in the meaning behind it. This wasn't about the building. It never was. It was control. Simon straightened and stepped back. The moment closed as cleanly as it began. Finish what you started, he said. Then get back to your actual work. Kyle nodded once. Nothing more. Simon turned and walked away without looking back. The ranch seemed to breathe again as he left. Evelyn stepped away from the doorway before Kyle re-entered. She picked up a cloth, continuing to clean as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Kyle walked in, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Evelyn broke the silence. He doesn't want this, she said. Kyle didn't look at her. He doesn't have to. He controls everything here. Yes. Evelyn set the cloth down slowly. Including you. That made him look at her. Not sharply. Not defensively. Just directly. For now, he said. The answer was quiet, but it held something new. Not defiance. Not yet. Possibility. The storm did not announce itself. It built quietly, like pressure under the surface. By late afternoon, the sky had lost what little light it held. Gray turned to heavy white, and the wind began to move differently, not passing through the land, but pushing against it. Evelyn noticed it first in the way the windows rattled, then in the sudden drop of temperature that made the air feel thinner. She stepped outside just as the first wave of snow cut across the yard. Not falling, driven. Sharp. Fast. Kyle. He was already moving, securing a loose gate near the stable. The horses were restless, shifting, reacting before anything became visible to the eye. It's coming in fast, Evelyn said, raising her voice over the wind. I see it. That was all. No explanation. Just action. Within minutes, the ranch shifted into motion. Doors closed. Equipment covered. Animals moved. No one gave instructions out loud, but everyone knew what to do. Evelyn didn't. She stood near the edge of the yard, watching the movement accelerate around her, until Kyle reached her. You shouldn't be out here, he said. I can help. Not like this. The wind hit harder, forcing her to step back. Snow began to thicken, blurring distance into white noise. Where do I go? She asked. Kyle looked toward the main house, then toward the stable further out. A brief calculation. Inside, he said. Another gust cut across them, stronger than the last. The horses near the far fence panicked, pulling against their restraints. Kyle turned immediately. Stay here, he said. I'm not staying. But he was already moving. Evelyn watched him cross into the storm, his figure fading quickly into the growing white. For a second, she hesitated. The rational choice was clear. Go inside. Stay safe. Wait it out. She didn't move. Another sound broke through the wind, a sharp crack of wood from the direction Kyle had gone. Evelyn made the decision without thinking. She pulled her coat tighter and moved forward. The storm swallowed distance. What had been a clear path minutes ago turned into disorientation. The buildings blurred. The ground disappeared under uneven layers of snow. The wind pressed against her from every side, forcing her to lean forward just to move. Kyle. Her voice vanished before it carried. She pushed further, following instinct more than sight. Then she saw it. The outline of the smaller stable at the far end of the property. The door hung partially open, slamming violently against the frame with each gust. Evelyn reached it and forced her way inside. The difference was immediate. The wind dropped from a roar to a distant force pressing against the walls. The air was still cold, but contained. Kyle stood near the back, holding a horse steady, his hand firm against its neck. Another section of the inner wall had broken loose, leaving a gap where the storm pushed in through splintered wood. You shouldn't be here, he said without turning. You needed help, she answered, catching her breath. I said stay inside. And leave you out here alone? He didn't respond immediately. The horse shifted under his hand, nervous but controlled. Close the door, he said instead. Evelyn moved quickly, forcing the door shut with effort before securing it as best she could. The structure groaned under the pressure of the wind, but it held, for now. She turned back. What do you need? Kyle glanced at the broken section of wall. That. No further explanation. Evelyn grabbed a loose board from the ground and moved toward him. Together, without planning, they worked. He held the structure in place while she aligned the board. He passed her nails without looking. She understood without asking. The coordination wasn't practiced, but it worked. Minutes passed. Or longer. Time lost meaning inside the storm. At one point, the wind hit hard enough to shake the entire structure. Evelyn froze instinctively. Kyle didn't. Keep going, he said. She did. When the last board held, the immediate pressure lessened. Not gone, but reduced enough to breathe without fighting the air itself. Evelyn stepped back, her hands cold, her breath uneven. That should hold. For now, Kyle said. Silence settled, but not completely. The storm continued outside, a constant presence pressing against the thin barrier of wood between them and everything else. Evelyn moved toward a small, rusted lantern hanging near the wall, her fingers finding a box of Strike Anywhere matches tucked into a high shelf by the door. She shook it, half full. There's no power here. No. She lit it anyway. The soft glow filled the space just enough to replace the harsh gray with something warmer. The horse behind them shifted again, calmer now. Evelyn leaned against one of the support beams, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion creeping in. How long does this last? Hours. Sometimes longer. She let out a slow breath. And we're just staying here? Kyle looked at the door, then at the walls. A brief assessment. Yes. No alternative. No reassurance. Just reality. Evelyn slid down slightly, sitting against the beam. The cold still reached through the wood, but it was better than outside. She pulled her coat tighter around herself. For a while, neither of them spoke. The storm filled the silence. Then, quietly, "You didn't have to come," Kyle said. Evelyn looked at him. "Neither did you." "That's different." "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the opposite wall, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the space they occupied. "This place doesn't give you a choice," he said finally. Evelyn studied him. "It always does." A faint shift in his expression. "Not agreement. Not rejection. You don't know that yet," he said. "Then I will." The answer came without hesitation. Another silence. But this one held something else. Not distance. Not tension. Something closer to recognition. The lantern flickered slightly as the wind pressed again against the walls. Evelyn rubbed her hands together, trying to bring warmth back into them. It wasn't enough. Kyle noticed. Without a word, he moved closer, not abruptly, not uncertainly. Just enough. He reached for an old blanket draped over a nearby rail and handed it to her. She took it. "Thanks." He didn't step away completely. The space between them changed, subtle, but real. Evelyn wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, the warmth immediate but incomplete. The cold still lingered underneath. Kyle hesitated for a fraction of a second, then made a decision. He sat beside her, not close enough to assume, not distant enough to ignore. The shared warmth built slowly, almost reluctantly. Outside, the storm continued without pause. Inside, the silence shifted again. Not empty anymore. Not guarded. Just two people, held in place by something stronger than either of them, and no way to leave it. The storm did not end quickly. It faded in layers. By the time the wind dropped from a constant force to something distant, the silence inside the stable had already changed. It was no longer tension or caution. It was awareness. Evelyn woke first. Not fully, just enough to register warmth that wasn't hers alone. The lantern had burned low, its light reduced to a faint glow that barely held the edges of the room together. The cold was still there, but weaker now. Kyle sat beside her, unmoving. Not asleep. Not alert. Present. For a moment, she didn't shift. She let the stillness remain exactly as it was. No sudden movements. No words to break it. Then she straightened slowly, the blanket slipping slightly from her shoulders before she adjusted it. "The storm?" she asked quietly. "Passing," Kyle answered. His voice was low, unchanged, but closer now. Not in distance. In tone. Evelyn looked toward the door. The sound outside had softened. No more violent pressure. Just wind moving across the land again. "We should head back," she said. Kyle nodded, but didn't stand immediately. Neither did she. The moment stretched, not uncomfortable, just unfinished. Evelyn broke it first, pushing herself to her feet. Before it changes its mind. A faint shift in his expression. Almost a response. They moved without urgency. The door opened with effort, but not resistance. Outside, the world had changed. Everything was white. The distance between buildings felt longer, emptier. Evelyn stepped out carefully, testing the ground beneath her. "This doesn't look easier." "It isn't," Kyle said, moving ahead slightly. "Stay close." She followed. The path back was slower. Measured steps. Controlled movement. The silence of fresh snow replaced the chaos of the storm, but it came with its own weight. Halfway across the yard, Evelyn slipped. It happened fast. Her footing gave under a hidden patch, her balance gone before she could correct it. Kyle caught her. Not dramatic. Not forceful. Just precise. His hand closed around her arm, steadying her before she hit the ground. For a second, neither moved. Evelyn looked at him. "I had it." "No, you didn't." There was no edge in his voice. Just fact. She exhaled, then nodded once. "Still counts." A brief pause. Kyle released her, but slower than necessary. They kept moving. By the time they reached the main house, the ranch had begun to return to motion. Doors opened. People stepped out, assessing damage, checking animals, restoring order. No one asked questions. No one needed to. Evelyn stopped near the porch, brushing snow from her coat. Her hands were still cold, but the exhaustion had settled deeper now, less physical, more internal. Kyle stepped beside her. "You should rest," he said. "I have work to do." "You have time." She looked at him. "Not if I want that building ready." A pause. Kyle glanced toward the structure they had been fixing. The roof held. The windows were intact. It had survived. "Later," he said. Evelyn hesitated. Not because she disagreed, but because she didn't want to stop. Stopping meant thinking. But he was right. She nodded once. Later. They stood there a moment longer than necessary. The space between them was no longer unfamiliar. Not undefined, but not spoken. Evelyn broke it first. "You stayed calm out there." Kyle didn't look at her. "It's not the first storm." "That's not what I meant." He turned slightly. You didn't panic, she said. You just acted. A pause. That's how you get through it, he answered. Evelyn studied him for a second longer. There was more behind that answer, but he wasn't offering it. Not yet. Still, she said quietly. You handled it. Another pause. Kyle nodded once. So did you. The words landed differently than anything he had said before. Not dismissive. Not neutral. Acknowledgement. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She just held his gaze for a second longer than usual, then looked away. I should go, she said. Kyle stepped back slightly, giving her space without making it obvious. Yeah. No further words. Evelyn walked inside, closing the door behind her. The warmth of the house felt different now. Not enough, but noticeable. She leaned back against the door for a second, letting the quiet settle around her. Something had changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough. Outside, Kyle remained on the porch a moment longer before turning back toward the ranch. Work resumed. The routine returned. But the distance between them was no longer the same. The ranch returned to routine faster than Evelyn expected. Damage from the storm was already being assessed, repaired, absorbed into the rhythm of work as if it had always been there. Nothing stopped for long at Blackwood. Not weather. Not disruption. Not people. She spent the morning in the half-finished school building. The cold had seeped into the wood overnight, making every surface feel harder, more resistant. She worked anyway, cleaning, measuring. Between the tasks, she made 3 brief, low-voice calls on her satellite phone, ensuring the documents she'd been gathering were already in the hands of the land office in the valley. The smell of stale dust and cold cedar oil clung to her skin as she mapped out where the heavy oak desks, salvaged from an old schoolhouse in the valley, would finally stand, replacing the crates that had served as anchors for too long. Kyle arrived without announcement. He set down a small crate of tools near the wall and looked around once before speaking. Roof held. Evelyn didn't look up. Good. A pause. Stable too, he added. That made her stop. She straightened slightly, glancing at him. You checked both. Yes. No explanation. No justification. Just confirmation. Evelyn turned back to her work, but something shifted in the tone between them. Not distance, but function. You didn't have to do that, she said. I was already there. That's not an answer. Kyle leaned lightly against the frame, watching her for a moment. It is here. Evelyn let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. She continued wiping dust from a surface that would immediately collect it again. For a while, they worked in silence. Not the forced kind, the practical kind. At one point, Evelyn measured a broken section of wall twice, then frowned. This doesn't match the plan, she said. There is no plan, Kyle replied. There has to be. Why? She paused, looking at him fully now. Because otherwise it becomes temporary. Kyle didn't respond immediately. He moved closer, inspecting the same section. His hand pressed lightly against the wood, testing its strength. Everything here is temporary, he said. That's not true. A beat of silence. He looked at her. Name something that isn't. Evelyn hesitated. The answer didn't come easily. Not because there was none, but because everything she could think of felt conditional here. Before she could respond, footsteps approached outside. Both of them noticed it at the same time. The sound was heavier than usual. Purposeful. Kyle straightened first. Evelyn followed his gaze to the doorway. Simon Blackwood entered without hesitation. The temperature of the room seemed to drop even before he spoke. He looked at the partially cleaned space, then at the tools, then at Evelyn. His expression remained controlled, but less patient than before. You're still expanding this, he said. Evelyn stood fully. I'm preparing it. For what? For learning. Simon's gaze shifted slightly, landing on Kyle. And you? I'm helping, Kyle said. That wasn't the instruction. Kyle didn't respond. Simon stepped further inside, surveying the progress. It wasn't approval or disapproval. It was ownership being evaluated. This was not meant to become a project, he said calmly. It was meant to be functional. It is functional, Evelyn replied. Simon turned back to her. Function is not improvement. A pause followed. Evelyn met his gaze. Then maybe that's the problem. The words landed cleanly. Kyle looked at her sharply for a fraction of a second, but didn't interrupt. Simon didn't react immediately. He studied her again, slower this time. You misunderstand your position here, he said finally. I understand it perfectly, Evelyn answered. A silence stretched between them. Not loud, Not emotional. Controlled pressure. Simon broke it first. Kyle, he said without looking away from Evelyn, step outside. Kyle didn't move immediately. The command hung in the air for a moment longer than before. Then he complied. He walked out without speaking, closing the door behind him. Evelyn remained where she was, now alone with him. Simon took a slow step forward. You are not here to change this place, he said quietly. You are here to serve it. Evelyn held his gaze. And what exactly is this place meant to be? A pause. Simon's expression hardened slightly. A system that works, he said. And if it doesn't? It does. No hesitation. No doubt allowed. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Not for everyone. That made something shift, not visibly, but beneath control. Simon stepped closer, just enough to close distance again. You will teach what is required, he said. Nothing more. Evelyn didn't look away. And if I don't? The question hung. Simon's voice lowered slightly. Then you will not remain here. A final boundary. Clear. Unmoving. He turned and walked out without waiting for a response. The door closed behind him. Silence returned. Evelyn stood still for a moment, then exhaled slowly, grounding herself again in the space. Kyle re-entered after a short pause. He didn't ask what was said. He already knew enough. Evelyn looked at him. He doesn't want change. Kyle nodded once. No. He wants control. Another pause. Yes. Evelyn turned back toward the unfinished room. Then we're building the wrong thing. Kyle watched her for a moment. What are you building? She didn't answer immediately. Then quietly. A way out. The word she said didn't echo in the room, but it changed how the space felt. A way out. Kyle didn't react immediately. Not because he didn't hear it, but because he was deciding what it meant that she said it out loud. Evelyn turned back to the wall she had been measuring, as if the sentence belonged there instead of between them. She continued working, marking lines, checking distances, acting like nothing had shifted. But something had. Kyle stepped closer to the structure, running his hand along the edge of a beam. There isn't one, he said finally. Evelyn didn't look at him. There always is. That's not how this place works. She stopped measuring, slowly turned. Then how does it work? Kyle didn't answer right away. His eyes moved across the room, then toward the window, then back. As if the answer wasn't a thought, but something learned too early. It keeps you where you are, he said. People allow that. A pause. Not here, he replied. Silence settled again, but thinner this time. Evelyn stepped closer to him. Not aggressively, just enough to close distance. You said your father made a mistake, she said quietly. Kyle's expression tightened slightly. Evelyn didn't push harder yet. What mistake? A longer pause followed. Outside, wind moved across the ranch, softer than the storm, but still present, still pressing. Kyle finally looked at her directly. He trusted the wrong agreement, he said. That's not an answer. It is the only one you need. Evelyn held his gaze. No, it's not. Another silence. This one heavier. Kyle straightened slightly, stepping back just enough to re-establish space. My father worked this land, he said. He thought it meant something. That loyalty mattered. And Kyle hesitated. That was new. He lost it, he said. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She studied him, not his words, but what he was avoiding. To who? She asked. Kyle didn't answer, but the answer was already in the air. Simon. Evelyn turned slightly, processing it. That's the debt. Kyle didn't confirm it, didn't deny it, which was confirmation enough. Evelyn exhaled slowly. So you're not here because you owe him. Kyle's jaw tightened. I am here because I stayed, he said. That's not the same thing. It is now. Evelyn stepped back, looking around the unfinished room. The walls, the tools, the space they had been building. And he uses that, she said quietly. Kyle didn't respond. Evelyn turned back to him. He uses it to keep you here. A pause. Yes, Kyle said. The honesty was simple, but it changed the weight of everything again. Evelyn nodded slightly, as if confirming something to herself. That means it can be broken, she said. Kyle looked at her more sharply now. No, he said. It can't. Everything can be broken. This can't. The firmness in his voice wasn't anger. It was certainty shaped by experience. Evelyn didn't back down. Or you've just never seen it done. That landed differently. Kyle didn't respond immediately. His gaze stayed on her, but something in it shifted, just slightly. Not agreement. Not resistance. Something in between. Before he could answer, footsteps sounded outside again. Both of them stopped. But this time, it wasn't Simon. It was faster. uneven. Multiple people. The door opened abruptly. A ranch hand stood there, breathing hard. Kyle, he said quickly. We've got a problem at the north fence. Cattle are moving wrong. Something's wrong with the line. Kyle didn't hesitate. He moved immediately. Evelyn followed without thinking. They crossed the yard fast, boots sinking into softened snow and mud beneath. The ranch had shifted again into urgency. Workers moved toward the northern side, voices low, controlled but tense. When they reached the fence line, the problem became visible immediately. Part of the boundary had been compromised, not fully broken, but unstable. The cattle were agitated, pushing against sections that no longer held properly. This wasn't storm damage, one of the men said. Kyle crouched, inspecting the posts. His expression changed, not emotional, but focused. Someone loosened it, he said. Evelyn looked at the structure. Why would anyone do that? Kyle didn't answer right away. His eyes moved along the line, calculating. Then quietly, to force movement, he said. Evelyn turned to him. Movement where? Kyle stood slowly. Toward the lower field, he said. A pause. That's not ours, one of the ranch hands said. Silence fell briefly. Evelyn looked at Kyle. That would affect a neighboring property. Kyle nodded once. Then the implication settled fully. Not accident. Not negligence. Control. Evelyn exhaled slowly. He's redirecting them. Kyle didn't correct her. That was enough. The wind moved through the fence line again, rattling what remained intact. Evelyn looked across the land. This is how he operates. Kyle's voice was low. Yes. A long pause followed. Then Evelyn said it clearly. He doesn't just control people. Kyle looked at her. He controls outcomes. Another silence. Evelyn nodded once. And you've been part of it. That one landed deeper. Kyle didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it. Just stood there, looking at the broken line in front of him. For the first time, the control system wasn't invisible anymore. It was visible, and therefore, exposed. The repair work at the fence took longer than anyone wanted, but no one spoke about time. On Blackwood Ranch, problems were not measured in hours. They were measured in what failed and what still held. Evelyn stayed until the line was stabilized again. She didn't lift the heavy posts like the others, but she watched closely, learning the structure of how damage was hidden, not just fixed. Kyle worked without stopping. No hesitation. No visible frustration. Just movement, assessment, correction. But something in him had changed since the discovery at the fence. Not in what he did, but in how long he paused before doing it. When the last section was secured, the ranch hands drifted back toward their tasks. The urgency dissolved, but not the tension. Evelyn remained near the fence line. Kyle approached her slowly, wiping dirt from his hands. That wasn't random, she said. No, he replied. Evelyn looked out across the land. He knew exactly where that would lead. Kyle didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, yes. That single word confirmed more than it explained. Evelyn turned toward him fully. So this isn't just control inside the ranch. Kyle met her gaze. It never was. A pause stretched between them. Evelyn exhaled slowly. He's extending it outward. Kyle nodded once. Silence settled again, but heavier now. Broader. Evelyn looked down at her hands, still cold from the work. And you've been helping maintain that system. Kyle didn't react defensively. Not anymore. That phase had already passed. I've been inside it, he said. That's not the same as helpless. A flicker of tension returned to his jaw. No, he agreed. It isn't. Evelyn studied him carefully. Not accusing. Not softening either. Just understanding the shape of what stood in front of her. You could have stopped this, she said. Kyle looked away briefly, toward the ranch buildings in the distance. No, he said. Not alone. That's not what I asked. A pause. Kyle's voice lowered slightly. I tried, he said. That was new. Not denial. Not avoidance. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She let the silence settle fully before speaking again. Then why are you still here? Kyle looked at her directly. This time, no hesitation. Because leaving doesn't undo what's already been done. The answer hung between them. Not excuse. Not justification. Just consequence. Evelyn nodded slightly, absorbing it. Then she turned back toward the ranch. Then we don't undo it, she said. We break the structure that keeps it running. Kyle watched her carefully. That structure is the ranch. No, Evelyn replied. That's just where it lives. A pause. Then, where's Simon? She asked. Kyle didn't answer immediately. That delay was enough. Evelyn understood before he spoke. He's not just here, she said quietly. Kyle's expression tightened slightly. No, he said. A long silence followed. The wind moved across the open field, carrying cold air through broken fence lines and repaired wood. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then the system has reached points. Kyle looked at her. Yes. And you know them. Another pause. Yes. That changed everything again. Evelyn stepped closer. Then we don't fight him here. Kyle didn't respond immediately. He was thinking, not resisting, calculating the weight of what she was saying. Finally, if you move against him, he said, you don't get second chances. Evelyn nodded once. I'm not looking for a second chance, she said. That silence after her words was different. Not uncertainty, not tension, decision-forming. Kyle studied her for a long moment. Then, quietly, what are you planning? Evelyn looked past him, toward the ranch, toward the structure they had begun rebuilding days ago, toward the system they were now beginning to see fully. I'm just looking at the holes, Kyle, she said, her voice dropping. Every fence has a weak post. I'm finding yours. Kyle looked at her for a long second, the ghost of a shrug moving his shoulders. Careful. Some holes are dug on purpose. For the first time, he didn't correct her, didn't limit her, just stood beside her, seeing the same structure she was beginning to see, and understanding, without saying it, that something irreversible had already started. The ranch did not feel the same anymore. Not because it had changed, but because it had been seen differently. Once something hidden becomes visible, it stops being invisible even when it remains intact. Evelyn moved through the day with that awareness pressing behind every action. She still worked on the school building, still measured, still cleaned, but now everything was part of something larger. Not isolated tasks. Points on a map she was building in her mind. Kyle noticed the shift without needing to ask. He didn't stop her. He didn't support her either. He simply stayed close enough to observe what she would do next. By late afternoon, Evelyn was alone inside the unfinished structure. The light was lower, angled through the dusty windows, cutting the room into fragments. Kyle entered without announcement. You're not sleeping, he said. Evelyn didn't look up. Neither are you. A pause. That's not an answer, he said. It is, she replied. Just not the one you expected. Kyle stepped further inside, stopping near the center of the room. You're changing how you move, he said. Evelyn set down her measuring tool slowly. I'm understanding how this place moves. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. It isn't. Silence settled briefly between them. Not heavy now. Focused. Kyle watched her carefully. You're planning something. Evelyn finally looked at him. I told you I'm mapping. That leads somewhere. Yes. Another pause. Kyle's voice lowered slightly. If Simon sees that, he already sees more than we think. Evelyn interrupted. That made Kyle stop. Not because it was new, but because it was acknowledged without fear. Evelyn stepped closer to the table where her notes were scattered. Not papers in the traditional sense. Marks, sketches, patterns of movement, supply flows, labor assignments. Not formal, but structured. He doesn't just control people, she said. He controls pressure points. Debt, loyalty, access. Kyle didn't respond. Evelyn continued. And you're one of them. A brief tightening in Kyle's expression. I already told you that, he said. Yes, Evelyn replied. But now I understand what it means. She pointed lightly at one of her sketches. The cattle route wasn't about cattle. It was about redirecting attention, testing response time, measuring compliance outside the ranch. Kyle stepped closer to the table, studying it. You're assuming structure, he said. I'm observing it. A pause. Kyle exhaled slowly. Even if you're right, it doesn't change the fact that he owns everything around here. Evelyn looked at him directly. Ownership is not the same as control. That sentence landed differently. Kyle didn't answer immediately. He looked at the notes again, then at her. What are you trying to do with this? He asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Find the point where it stops being stable. Silence. Not disbelief. Not agreement. Recognition of direction. Kyle's voice lowered. That point doesn't exist. Evelyn shook her head slightly. Everything has a breaking threshold. Kyle studied her for a long moment. You're talking about a collapse, he said. I'm talking about exposure, she replied. Another pause. The difference between those two words changed the shape of the conversation. Kyle stepped back slightly, looking toward the window. Outside, the ranch continued its routine. Normal, unaware of how it was being reinterpreted. If you're wrong, he said quietly, There's no way back from this. Evelyn nodded once. Then I don't intend to be wrong. That was the first time he didn't immediately challenge her certainty. Instead, he asked something else. What do you need from me? Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Not surprised. Not relieved. Just assessing. Access, she said finally. Not permission. Not protection. Access. Kyle didn't respond immediately. Then, slowly. I can give you parts of it, he said. Evelyn nodded. That's enough. A silence followed. But it was different now. Not between opposition and agreement. Between two people aligned on something neither fully controlled yet. Kyle looked at her notes again. If Simon notices the shift in me. He already has, Evelyn said. That made him go quiet. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Kyle stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. You're not just mapping him, he said. Evelyn met his gaze. No, she replied. I'm mapping how he can be interrupted. The word hung in the air. Interrupted. Not destroyed. Not confronted. Interrupted. Kyle didn't answer. But he didn't step away either. And that, more than anything, marked the point where the structure of everything around them began to shift, without anyone outside noticing yet. The change did not announce itself. It accumulated. Small adjustments in behavior. Slight delays in response. Quiet recalculations in how orders were followed and how information moved through the ranch. Nothing visible enough to trigger alarm, but enough to alter flow. Evelyn noticed it first in the way people spoke around Kyle. Not openly, not directly, but less certain, more cautious, as if something familiar had become less predictable. Kyle noticed it too. He didn't comment on it. He simply adapted. Less presence in open spaces. More movement between points that mattered. And always, Evelyn was aware of where he was, and where he was not. Inside the school building, the final layout had begun to take shape. Not finished, but defined. A structure that no longer looked temporary. Evelyn marked the last measurement when Kyle entered. He didn't knock. He rarely did now. They're asking questions, he said. Evelyn didn't look up. Who is? The men. That made her pause. She set the tool down slowly. About what? Kyle stepped further inside. About me. Silence followed. Evelyn turned slightly toward him. What kind of questions? Kyle didn't answer immediately. That delay carried weight. Whether I'm still aligned with him, he said. Evelyn studied him carefully. And are you? Kyle met her gaze directly. No. Simple. Final. But not without consequence. Evelyn exhaled slowly, absorbing it. That changes timing, she said quietly. Yes, Kyle replied. Another pause. Outside, wind moved across the ranch again. Not a storm. Just pressure. Constant. Evelyn walked to the table where her notes were now organized into layers, routes, dependencies, control points, behavioral patterns. It's becoming visible, she said. Kyle nodded once. To them. And to him. A brief silence. Yes, Kyle said again. Evelyn tapped one section of the layout. Then we don't expand further. Kyle stepped closer. We stop here. Evelyn shook her head slightly. We consolidate. That distinction mattered. Kyle understood it immediately. You're locking the map, he said. Yes. A pause. Kyle looked at the structure she had built. Not just the building, but the understanding beneath it. When he asked, Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked toward the window, toward the ranch beyond it, toward the system that still functioned as if nothing was wrong. Soon, she said. Kyle nodded once. No hesitation. No objection. Then he said quietly, if we do this, there's no version where it stays contained. Evelyn met his gaze. I know, she said. That was the moment the plan stopped being theoretical. Not because it was ready, but because it was accepted. A sound outside interrupted the silence. Footsteps. Not hurried. Not uncertain. Controlled. Kyle shifted immediately. Evelyn didn't move. The door opened. Simon Blackwood stood there, his presence a heavy anchor in the doorway. He looked at the room first, his eyes trailing over the freshly oiled wood and the sharpened edges of the desks. Then at Evelyn. Then at Kyle, his gaze lingering on the calluses on Kyle's hands. Marks of labor that weren't part of the ranch's daily quota. And this time, he didn't ask questions immediately. He simply observed. The silence stretched longer than before. Then Simon spoke. You've both been working late, he said. Not a question. A confirmation. Evelyn held his gaze. There's work to be done. Simon's eyes shifted slightly. There always is. His attention moved to Kyle. Longer this time. He was no longer evaluating output. He was evaluating direction. Something subtle changed in his expression. Not anger, not surprise. Recognition of deviation. Then quietly, "I've built this place on predictability," Simon said. Evelyn didn't respond. Cal didn't either. Simon stepped further inside. "And unpredictability," he added, "is usually the first sign of failure." A pause. Evelyn finally spoke. "Or change." That word landed differently. Sharper. Simon looked at her directly. For the first time, the control in his expression tightened, not breaking, but reinforcing. "You should be careful with words like that," he said. Evelyn didn't look away. "Why?" A brief silence. Then Simon answered. "Because they tend to spread." Kyle's hand moved slightly at his side. Not aggressive, not visible to most, but present. Evelyn noticed. Simon did too. The room did not move, but everything in it had become aligned toward a point that was no longer neutral. Simon turned slightly toward the door. "I expect both of you at the main house tomorrow morning," he said. No explanation. No tone change. Just command. Then he left. The door closed. Silence returned, but it was no longer stable. Kyle exhaled slowly. "That was not routine," he said. Evelyn nodded once. "No," she replied. A pause. Then quietly, "It's starting." The morning at the main house did not begin with a conversation. It began with the sound of a structure screaming under its own weight. Evelyn didn't wait for an invitation. She walked into Simon's study before the sun had fully cleared the jagged horizon of the Gallatin Range. The room smelled of old paper, expensive tobacco, and the cold, sterile scent of a man who believed he owned the air people breathed. Simon was seated behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single, dark soul. He didn't look up as she entered, but the air in the room tightened, the pressure dropping until it felt like the walls were leaning inward. "You're early," Simon said. His voice was a low, resonant stone. "I find that people who rush usually have something they're trying to outrun. And I find that people who sit still for too long start to believe the world stopped moving with them," Evelyn replied. She didn't sit. She walked to the center of the room and placed a thick, weather-beaten leather folder on the mahogany surface. It hit the wood with a dull, heavy thud that echoed in the silence. Simon finally looked up. His eyes were gray, like the Montana winter, unblinking and devoid of heat. "What is this?" "The map," Evelyn said. "But not the one you think. You've spent 30 years building a kingdom of shadows, Simon. You've moved fences, you've lost deeds, and you've bought the silence of men who didn't know they had a choice. But shadows only work when there's no light to define them." She opened the folder. Inside were not just sketches, but photocopies of county records, bank ledgers from the valley, and a series of hand-drawn diagrams that linked the ranch's cattle movements to the systematic bankruptcy of 3 neighboring properties over the last decade. "You're a schoolteacher, Evelyn," Simon said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a threat wrapped in a calm observation. "You should stick to phonics and arithmetic. Don't play at being a judge." "I'm not playing," she said, leaning forward, her hands flat on his desk. "I've spent weeks tracing the pressure points. You didn't just control the ranch. You controlled the flow of debt. You've been redirecting the north fence line for years, slowly suffocating the water rights of the Miller family until they had to sell. To you. For pennies." The door behind her creaked open. The sound was sharp, like a bone breaking. Kyle stepped in. He wasn't wearing his work jacket. He looked different, lighter, as if the invisible gravity of the ranch had finally lost its grip on his shoulders. In his hand, he carried a small, rusted iron box. He walked past Evelyn and set it directly on top of Simon's ledgers. "The storage building wasn't just empty, Simon," Kyle said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the caution that had been his armor for years. "It was a graveyard for things you wanted forgotten. My father didn't lose his share of the North Range because of a bad season. He lost it because you never filed his tax payments. I found the receipts, signed by you, hidden under the floorboards of the schoolhouse." Simon didn't move. Not a muscle in his face betrayed him, but the knuckles of his folded hands turned white. The silence in the room wasn't just a pause anymore. It was the sound of an empire collapsing in slow motion. "You think this changes the reality of this land?" Simon asked, his gaze moving between them. "I am the stability of this valley. Without me, there is no work. There is no order. There is no order in a lie," Evelyn said. "I sent copies of everything in this folder to the federal land office and the sheriff in the valley yesterday. By the time the sun is up, they'll be reading about the accidental fence movements and the withheld tax documents. You don't own the law, Simon. You just rented it for a while. Simon stood slowly, his shadow stretching across the maps like a shroud. For a moment, the air turned lethal. You think a federal auditor will make it past the front gate? He asked, his voice a jagged edge. They don't have to, Evelyn countered. I didn't just mail the papers. I uploaded the scans to a cloud server with a dead man's switch. If I don't log in by tomorrow noon, the entire file goes to the state attorney and the regional press. Killing the messenger won't stop the message, Simon. Simon stood up slowly. He looked older now, the sharp lines of his face suddenly deep and weary. But for a fleeting second, his hand twitched toward the heavy brass letter opener on his desk, his eyes flaring with the predatory instinct that had built this ranch. Then he looked at Kyle, whose hand was already resting on the door handle, and at the steady, unwavering gaze of Evelyn. The fire died as quickly as it had sparked, replaced by the hollow realization that his walls were no longer holding. He looked out the window at the ranch he had built on a foundation of theft and silence. The horses were moving in the pens. The men were beginning their chores. Everything looked the same, but the soul of the place had been pulled out through the front door. You've destroyed a life's work for a sense of justice that won't last through the winter, Simon whispered. No, Evelyn said, turning toward the door. I've just made sure that when the children sit in that schoolroom tomorrow, they're learning from a world that actually exists, not the one you invented for them. She walked out, her boots striking the floorboards with a finality that didn't need words. Kyle followed her. They didn't look back. The air outside was bracingly cold, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the study. The sky was an impossible, violent blue, the kind of color that only exists after a storm has cleared the world of its dust. They walked toward the truck in silence. Near the school building, a few of the ranch hands were standing, watching them. They didn't move to stop them. They didn't move to help Simon. They just watched, the wind whipping at their coats, realizing for the first time that the walls of the ranch were just wood and nails, and that the gates were finally open. Evelyn reached the driver's side and paused, looking at the building they had reinforced together. The windows were clear, reflecting the light of a new day. The map is finished, she said, looking at Kyle over the roof of the truck. Kyle looked at the horizon, at the road that stretched endlessly between the dry grass and the skeletal trees. It was the same road that had felt like a line away from everything when she arrived. Now, it just felt like a road. Where are you going? He asked. Away from here, she said. But the papers I left, they'll ensure the school stays. And they'll ensure the Miller family gets their water back. And your father's name. I know, Kyle interrupted softly. He looked at his hands, then at her. I think I'll stay. For a while. Someone has to make sure the new map stays accurate. Evelyn smiled. A real, weary, but triumphant smile. She got into the truck and started the engine. The roar broke the last of the silence, a defiant sound that echoed off the hills. In the mirror, she saw Kyle turn away from the main house and walk toward the north fence, not as a worker following orders, but as a man surveying his own boundaries. He wasn't waiting for the dust to settle, he was already clearing it. Evelyn shifted into gear, the road ahead finally matching the map in her mind. She turned onto the main road, the asphalt finally replacing the dirt, and she drove toward the horizon, where the world was wide, unforgiving, and perfectly, terrifyingly free. She didn't stop until she saw the lights of the highway patrol station 10 miles out. She pulled over, her hands finally shaking. She had broken the system, but she knew the valley would be healing for a long time. She picked up her phone, the real one, and saw the signal bars return to full. The silence was over.